Ladies and gentlemen, we are setting up for the second panel. The opening one is already behind us. And next up, we want to talk about the gender gap and using technology to overcome intersectional challenges. That will be interesting, the intersectional challenges in healthcare. As we bring more fresh water on the stage, always important, let me start introducing our panelists. We have Anya Roy, co-founder at Syrona Health, joining us today. We have Issy Gordon, associate at HambroPerks. We also have Tatiana Klimanova, accelerator director at FemTech Lab. Justin Smith, managing partner at Recharge Capital, and the panel moderator, Eva Wilson, senior associate at Marble. Hopefully, they're all with us already. Please join me on the stage and let's welcome them with applause. Hello there, good morning. Now you're the first one to enter the stage, free to choose wherever you feel most comfortable. Wonderful. And hopefully the microphones should be working. Let's test them. And enjoy the discussion. Over to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for joining our panel today on using technology to overcome intersectional challenges in healthcare. So this is a topic that I'm really interested about, and a topic that we touched upon a bit yesterday when we spoke about algorithmic discrimination and health equity. So healthcare has a long-standing history with biases and inequity, and some that have actually affected patient outcomes. A common example that we see is how women are 50% more likely to be misdiagnosed with heart attacks because symptoms of education have been centered around men. And as Andrew Miles mentioned yesterday as well, it's that technology can be an equalizer in healthcare, but as well can also exacerbate these inequities that we've seen over time. So in this topic today, we're going to this topic is very multifaceted. We'll try and look at it through a gender lens. And what we'll also do is look at biases in the patient journey and see how we can use technology to break it down. So we have a great panel around us, and we'll start with introductions. I'll start with Justin here on my right.
Good morning, everyone. Justin Smith. I'm from New York City. I'm a partner over at Recharge Capital. We invest across the healthcare space, but specifically in fertility. We invest in fertility clinics over in Southeast Asia, Europe, and the GCC, and then we also invest in technology that we distribute through those clinics.
I'll pass this to Tatiana.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for this host and this amazing panel. I think it's such an important topic. My name is Tatiana. I'm running a FemTech Lab accelerator, which is an innovation hub for startups, early stage startups innovating in women's health. We started just after pandemic, or in the midst of pandemic in 2020. We have accelerated over 70 startups since then. We've run 6 cohorts, and our 6th cohort demo day is tomorrow, so I'm flying back to London. We're going to have same room full of investors, hopefully, and we'll accelerate innovation in women's health. Thank you. Shall I pass on to Anya? Oh,
I think this works, right? Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Anya Roy. I'm the co-founder of Syrona Health. Syrona Health is a digital health platform backed by Y Combinator, which specifically supports gender-inclusive, reproductive, sexual, hormonal health and cancer screening. So really excited to be here. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Issy. I'm an associate at HambroPerks. So we're a generalist multi-stage investor. I predominantly work on our pre-seed Series A fund, and I cover all our healthcare investments. The kind of 2 key things that we're focused on as a fund is what we refer to as taboo health, and lots of this falls into that segment. And secondly, the role of clinical trials and how we can improve that entire ecosystem.
Thanks so much. And I'm Eva Wilson, an associate at Marbles. It's a market access consultancy, and I'm also a global health enthusiast and have a good background in that. So we're going to start at the start of patient journeys with clinical trials, and Issy, you mentioned that you do some work in that. So can you talk to us about some of the barriers that we see in clinical trials and how tech can be used to remove some of these barriers and make them more inclusive?
Yeah, so the clinical trial space has had an interesting relationship with gender. There's some pretty alarming stats out there about this. So Nowadays, it seems that PCOS and endometriosis are about as common as diabetes, and yet diabetes is seen 30 times the funding. Generally, women's only conditions have received 1% of the global funding for healthcare data. And there's plenty of drugs out there that were actually never tested on any women, which absolutely alarmed me the more I dug into this space. We're an investor in a company called Lindus Health. They run decentralized clinical trials, or actually they have a stand outside if anyone's interested. But what Lindus has done that's really broken down some of these barriers is they've made it accessible for people to participate in clinical trials, regardless of where they live, regardless of what they're being tested on. One of the big foundational things that I think isn't talked about in this industry enough is how difficult it can be for women to be part of this ecosystem. A lot of women are care providers, they are homemakers, they have school runs, they have children, they have full-time jobs. And going to a clinic every single day, showing up for something, whether it's paid or not, doesn't often align with the realities of their lives. And I think in this segment, we often talk about the benefits to a global population when a drug comes to market. And we talk about the benefits to pharma for Novo Nordisk type profits. But we don't often think about the actual people involved in bringing that drug to market. And mostly the onus there is on a patient in a trial. And making these trials great for people involved in them over and above a drug being good is an important part. And far too often, those patients are the least important in this value chain. So for us, actually, investing in infrastructure layers that make trials easier, quicker, improve recruitment, improve the target IDs, has been far more foundational than trying to just pour money into women's only clinical studies.
Thank you so much for that. And I really love what you spoke about, and I think we touched upon that yesterday as well, about community engagement as well, to make things more inclusive as well. Tatiana, I'd love to hear some of your insights as well on how to engage communities to make these clinical trials and the start of the health journey more inclusive and accessible.
Thank you. Just to build on Issy's point, endometriosis, PCOS, these conditions, 400 million women are suffering from, yet there isn't enough data. These areas haven't been prioritized for some bizarre reason for research and funding, and therefore there isn't data available for companies to go and innovate in this for these areas. And what we're seeing and at the accelerator and just in general in the industry, that a lot of the time, it's kind of upon startups themselves to go and carry out those studies and the research, and oftentimes they fund the research themselves. And one of the great kind of, since we're talking about technology and the bridging the gap with the help of technology, a fantastic startup based in Canada, they started in just after FemTech Lab in 2020, and it's My Normative in Canada, and they are using, it's a female-specific healthcare platform, and they're partnering with biotech companies to provide the data and kind of see how these technologies affect different genders, different sexes, different use cases. So I think it's super important to get the women involved and then using startups and technology to do that.
Thank you. That was really insightful as well, and talking about some of the successes as well in this field. That kind of makes me think about the work that you do, Anya, with Syrona Health. We were talking about underserved health journeys as well. Can you talk to us a bit about your experience in building up your startup, how tech has helped you propel some of the activities that you conduct?
Sure. I guess, one of the key realizations when you start the company is that there's a lot of misrepresented data out there, and then you're effectively building algorithms based on data that has potentially skewed effects. So, we've really taken a step back, and we've spent a lot of time talking to diverse stakeholders, and I think that's really key to building an inclusive startup in the first place. So that includes, speaking to charities, like engaging with those members, speaking to a wide variety of clinicians whilst building the platform, because the platform needs to serve diverse sort of needs. And so you need to look at the patient perspective, the clinician perspective, how they perceive, will they prescribe it, and then also go beyond that and really see if you're solving a problem and a real pain point. So there are various sort of like angles to building an inclusive startup. So from our perspective, we've seen a lot of trans men who are, assigned female at birth, for example, are not really called for their cervical cancer screening tests. So these are very real experiences felt on the ground, and we spent a lot of time looking at how do we use inclusive language on our digital health solution. How do we then collect data on those specific underserved health journeys as well? And maybe I'll give you an example of a SWAN study which was conducted a while ago, actually, which specifically talks about menopause and how it's experienced by different sort of ethnic backgrounds. And it's super interesting because I think when you think about menopause, you typically talk about hot flushes, and there are very specific sort of symptoms that are exacerbated depending on your ethnic background. So Afro-Caribbean women typically tend to really, experience issues when it comes to sleep disorders and insomnia. South Asian women typically have very high increases in CVD risk and diabetes. So even though menopause may be something that's a blanket, and people will go through those transitions potentially at different sort of age groups depending on the sort of biological clocks, etc. But, the way you experience it is so unique. And so those are the types of patient experiences that we're trying to collate and trying to build on. And the same for endometriosis. I think you're right, there's a huge lack of data when it comes to endometriosis. We actually have access to endometriosis biobanks which have collected longitudinal data over 10 years' time. But these are very rare and hard to find. And some of the key findings from those is that there is, again, cultural nuances to endometriosis. It's mislabeled and misdiagnosed so much, so the medical coding in the system is incorrect. So there's many sort of systemic issues, and whilst tech has enabled access to care, going back to your question, I think it's also there are some challenges that we're yet to kind of tackle.
I guess one thing to add to what Anya just said is, I guess from both an investor perspective and a founder perspective, this cohort of people is huge, and they've been ignored for so long that this tech is incredibly scalable from both an investment and a startup perspective. This is one of the easiest markets to attack right now in terms of obtaining users, because everyone has felt so underprovided for so long. And engagement can be really high if you get your product right and you get your marketing strategy or your sales strategy right, in a way that I haven't seen in a lot of other segments.
You won't need any gamification elements.
Yes, I'm not saying it doesn't come with challenges, it definitely does, but it's one of the most engaged sectors in very simple content products and very advanced technologies.
No, I think that's a really great insight as well. And just hearing from what you were saying, I think stigma comes up as well, because some of these health journeys we're speaking of have some stigma or taboo associated with it. I'm going to jump to you, Justin, because you do work in reproductive health as well, that with culture involved, can have a lot of stigma as well around not being able to get pregnant, men reproductive health. Can you talk to us a bit about that, about maybe education around stigma and where you think tech can play a role in that?
Yeah, sure. And just to give everybody context, I mean, we do a lot of work in the IVF space to help with declining birth rates globally. And IVF really started back in the 1920s, and for 50 years there was a lot of research, but no IVF actually being performed on human beings. And then at the end of the 1970s was when we had the first successful IVF baby in England. And since then, technology has just taken off. And quite frankly, what we're trying to do is allow people that want to have children easier. And what a lot of people don't realize is that 1 in 4 couples globally actually have issues conceiving. And it wasn't until probably 5 or 6 years ago that people really started to talk about this more, because nobody really wants to admit that they can't have children. And so where we think that we can really make a difference is really within emerging markets. What we've seen over the last few years has really been a natural tendency of prosperous civilizations sees declines in birth rates because people are waiting longer in life to have children. Children are more expensive, but what this causes is pretty significant population imbalances, because what you want to do is support the existence of a working class between the ages of 20 and 55 that can really both generate productivity, replace itself, and also support older generations. We've seen these issues across areas of Japan, but also other prosperous countries and civilizations. So our kind of take on this is, well, we can go in and we can actually start to purchase and consolidate clinics across Southeast Asia, across the GCC, across Europe, across Africa, and across Latin America, put in better standard operating procedures if they don't already exist, but then most importantly, bring down the cost of doing these services, and we can do that through technology. Right now, these services are too expensive for the common couple to go and have. In the US, it costs anywhere from $15,000 to $20,000 per cycle to go through the IVF process, and that doesn't include the cost of drugs to help with hyperovulation. And what we want to do is bring down those costs with the use of technology. And then the goal would be over time is to allow the cycle success rates, which certainly currently sit at around 40 to 45%. The technology exists to bring those up to 80, 85, 90%, but in the US specifically, it's very hard to get those technologies into the workflow because of our own FDA regulations. So from a cultural and from a regulatory standpoint, in places like Southeast Asia and Latin America, it's a lot easier to get the newest and greatest technologies into these workflows.
No, thank you. That was quite interesting as well. And I think we're speaking a bit about education as well, and with the use of now technology, whether it be Google or tech apps, and I think Anya, part of your work as well, mentions that. Can you talk to us a bit about more about the education aspect and how, with technology, things have become more accessible? How technology has become more accessible with the.
Yeah, I guess at some point everyone's used Dr. Google, right, and self-diagnosed them with a range of really serious, sinister conditions. So we've all been there. I think, you do have to question where that information is coming from, whether it's a relevant source, and whether you particularly have the knowledge to kind of gather that, put those two together, when, in essence, a clinician would be delivering a diagnosis. So I think there's a huge role for education in various communities about underserved sort of healthcare conditions in general. But I think one thing that we all have to acknowledge is that we access and process information differently and in an individual sense. And so, it's all about being able to ensure that A, the information that you present to those communities are relevant to them. B, that you're able to communicate in a way that they perceive as their preferred method. So, I think as a digital health platform, we'd love to host everything on our app, for example, but seriously, not everyone wants to, access information in that way only. And so we have to find other ways, whether you're running events or doing like grassroots community sort of events or working with charities. So you have to find various modes of educational campaigns that you can have. One of the key issues is that even when it comes to running these types of educational and marketing campaigns, we were up against Facebook's sort of limiting marketing sort of policies. Sometimes women's health is categorized as pornographic material, and so you're effectively censored. So there's a huge issue in this space, and I don't want to bore anyone to tears because I could go on about this for too long. But I think there's a huge sort of relevance for a lot of tech giants who have huge marketing and distribution channels to really think about their policies and how they can really take inclusion into consideration.
One of the things that we've thought about for a long time with our Taboo Health investments, particularly with Peppy and with Day, which are very women's health focused brands, is on that engagement piece, the tone you are using. So for plenty of women's and men's sexual health conditions, there is a often emotional relationship between users and discovering content. Quite often that relationship can be built on a place of guilt or fear or anxiety, predominantly about relationships, either with partners or parents or personal experiences. And we took a step back and said, actually, the way that we need to deliver some of this content needs to be about addressing and creating safe dialogue at the level about relationships, not just about the science and the medicine involved, but actually how you get to these endpoints. All of these endpoints at some point have something to do with relationships or not having relationships, and therefore speaking to people in a way that is trusted over and above just a medical tone of voice has been hugely impactful for those companies.
You're going to add something? No, I think what you just said was also really quite interesting as well, and it kind of brings me back to you, Justin, because as you mentioned, these things can be quite emotional as well, not just about the science. And I want to talk a bit about men reproductive health. So when we talk about, at least when I've heard about reproductive health, there's a lot of focus on the women as well. So can you talk to us a bit about men reproductive health as well, the stigma around that, how to maybe break down those barriers as well?
Yeah, sure. I mean, as it relates to men reproductive health, men have the same issue with sperm that women can with eggs in some respects, because not all sperm is perfect. Right now in the United States, especially on a lot of college campuses, there are agencies that are doing sperm collection. There are marketplaces being created that allow for transfer of sperm cross borders. And for men, it's definitely a very emotional thing, because if you want to sit here and use your sperm for contraception later in life, one of the pieces of going in and talking to a provider that's going to help you through this process is doing a test on your sperm. We've, to Izzy's point, and everybody's on education, I think the education around IVF, but in general, assisted reproductive procedures is really, really important, because people today don't really know what the services are, and there's a huge education that goes on up front when you decide, you've decided that you want to have a child, and you go in and you talk to a doctor on how to do it, and there's all these questions that get asked that really there's no real answers to. I mean, right now you look at what's one thing that you would want to know about a doctor that you go and check out. Well, what are their success rates? Well, what's the denominator effect of those success rates? Have they only been helping couples for the last 10 years that actually have a good chance of an outcome? And do your variables and traits match those couples? Because if they don't, worst case scenario is that you're not going to get taken by that doctor and you're going to have to go find somebody else. So overall, I mean, we want to make this more available to everybody, but we also want to, bring technology in that allows more providers to help more people at the same time.
No, thank you. And I know we've spoken on education as well and talking about patient education as well. do you have any insights to any of you on how to educate doctors and providers in this space?
Issy, you want to go?
Our approach for educating the wider medical community has come in with an open mind. I think there is also, I guess I should caveat this is quite a British perspective on this topic. There is still quite a lot of fear and anxiety from medical communities around technology. There's a lot of hallucination in some of these advanced AIs and their application in medicine. And there's also, years and years worth of tried and trodden practice on how to deliver care. And this isn't necessarily a gender point, but across the medical community, there is fear around how some of these could create negative patient outcomes, because their North Star is making sure that every patient gets the best care that they can have. And particularly in the UK, the price of that isn't on the doctors necessarily. It's on higher level stakeholders in the system who aren't facing off with patients. And one of the big pieces of work we've tried to do in this space is helping with that education and breaking down that fear, but also being quite respectful of why that exists and not pushing the community into suddenly changing all of their protocols and all of their approaches. So it's a very fine balance to walk. And actually some of the service providers here are leading the charge in this. Microsoft and IBM have done a lot of work, particularly with the NHS, to open this relationship up. And in the last year, I've seen the NHS engage with technology more so than the prior 30.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I mean, education is one thing, but also the medical profession is inherently a supply-constrained industry. And generally, doctors will get trained on where, a lot of the help is needed. We've had an influx of doctors within the study of biologics, the study of comorbidities, of cancers. The same thing is going on in fertility right now that happened really with software engineers a few decades ago, where software engineering became a very popular workflow within startups to advance technologies, but there was a lack of them until people at universities started to study this more. The same thing is going on within fertility services and various areas of healthcare at large. Another example that's somewhat tangentially related is in longevity. Which is where I'm actually heading after this, to Dubai to check out one of their new longevity clinics. And longevity itself is a new up-and-coming profession that does not have many standard operating procedures. But proactive medicine and trying to increase people's health spans is becoming increasingly important across different demographics and populations. And so we think that as these particular areas get more popular, there's going to be a following suit of education within the institutions of people studying to be able to become an endocrinologist or working in longevity.
Just to add that as an accelerator, we make sure that amongst our scope of mentors, we have a lot of doctors and medical professionals. And as stretched as NHS is, it's really great to see that those doctors reach out to us and they want to be involved, they want to see what's out there, and a lot of them are driven by personal, mission to advance, in our case, women's health technology specifically. But it works for founders as well. We make sure that our technologists and the founders have the medical clinicians, professionals involved in developing technologies, because it's important for the patient. So I think a lot is happening in the industry. And if there are any medical professionals in the room who want to be involved, check out FemTech Lab, and there are other accelerators available. And I'm sure VC firms are also looking for consultants. So there's a lot education kind of available there.
For me personally, in a founder role, I kind of see it as the holy trifecta of being co-creation. So develop your technology alongside clinicians. So we developed ours with a really well-known gynecologist from Portland Hospital in London, and she's driven how the platform looks, feels, what it can say, and effectively the infrastructure. The second one is evidence. So we have a lot of clinicians actually building evidence base alongside us. So there are academic clinicians who want to run clinical trials, really gather data, which really helps us as a startup to arm ourselves with evidence, whether it's having a conversation with pharma, whether it's having a conversation with other clinicians. And the last thing is compliance and regulatory bit. So, sad tears. Yeah, it's hard, but I think, from those things really help you think through some of the workflows that you were talking about and really kind of pinpoint areas of weaknesses as tech companies as well, and looks at risk. Really, it's all about risk management. And so that kind of protects the patient, the clinician, and the company long term. So those are the ways I feel that, clinicians can engage with communities like ours.
It's very unique to healthcare tech as well. In generalist SaaS, this kind of tension doesn't exist, and it's a super healthy tension. Like you said, it keeps people in a set of guardrails of good operating standards. It holds everyone to a higher bar than you would necessarily see in other areas. And actually, that's to the benefit of the companies ultimately, because they're building much higher quality products from the outset.
Yeah, no, that's very true, and especially in the health tech as well, regulations are so important, as you mentioned, to keep people to a standard, because these are things that are quite important as well. I just want to go back to the regulatory space. I think we've talked a bit about the NHS as well. I know in emerging markets is that, I think you mentioned before that there are not many SOPs really out there yet. Do you think that is that a good thing, being able to be more innovative, or do you think that could be a risk moving forward?
Yeah, sure. I'll speak a little bit about regulation because that actually dictates quite a bit of our strategy. I would say within IVF, there's quite a few SOPs that have come up over time, but those are different depending on the actual countries. Within longevity, there's a lot less right now. But one of the interesting things about Southeast Asia is actually the differences in regulations across the different countries. What we cater to right now through our clinics is actually a lot of Chinese medical tourism that comes down to Singapore to get IVF services done, but they cannot get all IVF services done in Singapore because of local regulation. For example, surrogacy is against child trafficking laws in Singapore. And so what we do is actually partner, acquire sister clinics in Thailand that we can send our couples to, or the embryos, so that they can be implanted in a surrogate mother. Same thing with genetics. Genetics actually is pretty illegal in every country within Southeast Asia, with the exception of Malaysia. And like I said, FDA regulations heavily influence the type of technology that we're able to enter into the workflows of fertility in the United States. So there is an arbitrage opportunity to go out and provide a turnkey service to couples. And that's what we're doing. We're trying to break down these barriers and be able to provide to both inhabitants of the particular locale, as well as medical tourism coming through, a very highly personalized experience, either using one clinic, but in most cases, multiple clinics.
Thank you. So I think today we've spoken a bit about the clinical trials, regulations, engagement, patient education. So how do you see the future going for this space, looking at health tech, its interactions with gender? Any insights? Tatiana, sorry.
Considering that we are at the end of the year, I think it's important to kind of look back into 2023 and appreciate how much has been achieved in kind of gender healthcare. And yesterday's panels, at the end of the day, were quite interesting in terms of kind of looking at the overall healthcare trends, investments, and even though like 23 has been a really difficult year for healthcare, innovation ecosystem in general. We've seen healthcare investments drop in 2023. I think it's important to acknowledge that for women's healthcare investments, even though 23 investments dropped, but overall women's healthcare sector has shown impressive momentum. So from 2018 till 2023, we have seen an increase in investment over 300%, and that is versus 15% in general healthcare. So I think it's, sorry, an impressive achievements that we need to kind of acknowledge and be thankful for. In addition, we have seen in 23 kind of over 70 deals, 75 deals, I think, in women's health, which is the second record number in the history of women's health deals. So it's not all doom and gloom despite the kind of the drop in investment. And finally, also we're celebrating 30 years anniversary since women started being included in clinical trials. So a lot of great positive things, and kind of looking into the future and the trends from again women's health perspective, and what we're seeing in FemTech Lab Accelerator is kind of the again, investment beyond, or more attention is being brought to areas beyond fertility, reproduction, pregnancy. We started seeing more innovation happening and investment happening in menopause, in mental health, in pelvic floor health, and that's happening globally across the world. We are now graduating our 6th cohort, and we have 5 startups innovating in menopause, and that's across that UK, Singapore, Indonesia. So it's really a very global trend, which is fantastic to see.
Yeah, I guess to build on what Tatiana said, in the last 2 years, there was a quite defined penny drop moment for the investment industry. I think it aligns nicely with the success of Maven and Carrot and LV and some of these big companies now proving that women's health can definitely be a big business. I'm heartbroken to say that for a long time, the investment community didn't consider it to be a possibility. And that worked pretty nicely for me, because I felt like there was a bit of arbitrage where we could go in really early while everyone else was ignoring this massive segment. But now, the industry's hugely woken up to this opportunity, both at the early stage and at the growth stage. And actually, I don't think there could be a better time to be founding a business in this industry. And if you don't do it now, there's almost the question of like, will you miss the wave, because everything will be kind of solidified and set in stone. There's been huge acceleration, and there is only more coming. So yeah, it's looking pretty good for this segment.
Yeah. I guess, you know, I'm really excited about what LLMs can do in the space. So whether it's the back office function, the claims functionality, all of the really like tiresome healthcare admin stuff that, you know, that has been really burdensome for a long time. How can LLMs really change the space? I think there are lots of like startups like tackling those issues. We're looking at how do we make our workflow smoother and easier. So I'm really excited about, you know, what the future looks like.
I mean, the only thing I'll add, the 2 things that we're most excited about outside of fertility is really within longevity that I mentioned, and within home health. Longevity, you know, is really being driven a lot in part by biologics, and biologics tie back to our original discussion around clinical trials. Biologics are in need of more clinical trials, and there is a big issue around matching people that are going through some sort of comorbidity with particular clinical trials. It's a very difficult problem to solve, especially because in a lot of times you are time constrained. Once you're diagnosed with something, in many cases, like if you have metastasized cancers within different parts of your body, you might only have 6 months to a year to live. And so how do you find the right clinical trial to do that? Within home health, we think there's a huge opportunity there. We think that trying to educate and to enable the family is really important. I think there's some cultural nuances to that, whereas in, for instance, Asian cultures, they seem to support their aging family a lot more. Over in the US, we don't seem to do that, and it's a big problem. But we really think that technology can help enable family members to help, and that's going to be a bigger and bigger issue as we go forward here.
All right, well, thank you so much. We have a little under 10 minutes. I'm going to open up the floor for any questions that may come about.
Anyone, ladies and gentlemen? Do we have a question in the room? Let's see.
No, okay.
No brave challenges this morning for our panelists? Yeah, we've got one. I may as well share mine.
Okay. Thank you. Hi, that was a really really, really good discussion. I'm a strategic advisor, venture partner, and I'm just kind of curious as to your views around fragmentation or possible fragmentation of this space as more innovations come to market, but focus very much on, you know, specific endpoints and niche cases. As important as those niche applications and cases are we at risk of just getting overwhelmed with, you know, like lots of point solutions and therefore can't leverage, you know, the full potential?
Yeah, I'll start on that. I mean, from the investor's perspective, how we're trying to approach this, and you know, it also becomes very clear when you listen to a lot of the pitches yesterday is, to your point, there's a lot of point solutions. They're very good solutions, but they fit within one particular part of the workflow. And you know, our solution, hopefully, to this is we want to own the entire workflow. We want to vertically integrate. We want to own the distribution points so that we can actually help those technologies fit into the bigger puzzle and ultimately be successful because of that. You know, is there the possibility that like one particular issue is flooded with a whole bunch of different solutions? Yes, that is true. But I would rather have more innovation than less when it comes to that.
Excellent question. And this is what we are kind of seeing. And this is to my earlier point of kind of recognition of what constitutes women's health that is beyond just reproductive health or is just beyond just breast cancer. We're starting to see more platform solutions, and especially this year has been more investments and acquisitions within platform solutions. So I think there's a company, Genev, that acquired a menopause solution into that platform. Also, it's driven by employers, for example, looking for a holistic benefits platform for their women employees rather than endpoint solutions. We are working with corporate partners who are looking for those intersectional solutions. So, for example, a couple of years ago, we were looking at just menstrual health, for example, but now this particular consumer health company is looking for solutions for menstrual health and mental health, and how both is being affected throughout the hormonal cycle, so you know, from all the way to menopause and beyond. So it is a positive trend that we're starting to see more holistic approach to women's health in general.
I'm a bit more cynical on this one, and I don't want to bring the mood down. I feel like one of the things I lie awake at night thinking about is, in this industry, have we run a little bit before we can walk? There are plenty of primary and secondary clinics that do not have a single piece of software aside from like a basic ERP running in them. And there's also amazing advanced technologies for diagnosing prostate cancer in, you know, under half a second. There's a big gap in between those two things. I've sort of come to the conclusion that it's on the investment community who work in the healthcare space to resolve that by looking really proactively for infrastructure layers. And that's kind of the approach we've taken with a lot of our strategy in health, because there's a sort of failure to launch risk if we don't do that. And I think that sits between mostly investors in the medical community, more so than the founders. But yeah, I think we are quite at risk if we don't sort it out.
Well, thank you so much for that insight as well. I think we're nearing, I don't know if there's any other questions, but I think, okay.
We may be having one more.
Yeah, one more.
Thanks. Pekka Simula, Innovestor, a VC fund in Helsinki, Finland. We were one of the early investors in Forendo Pharma in endometriosis that was acquired by Organon, so we know something about FemTech and also something very positive. On that note, it's been great to see that FemTech has become kind of an interesting sector also for many other investors. But I'm a bit cynical when it comes to reimbursement. What's your thinking on, you know, if there's a product in the market that's only targeting female health versus something that's only targeting male health, would its reimbursement be different, its pricing be different, you know, from the payer viewpoint?
Great question. We actually have to battle that on an everyday basis around reimbursement. So I think from what we're seeing, the distribution channels have really opened up though. So what you would see as traditional health plans sort of, effectively being your distribution channel and reimbursement process, it's a little bit different for biotech because, you're looking at very specific jurisdiction challenges, a lot of evidence base. But I think that's moving in the health insurance space as well. So we're seeing health insurers ask for evidence, ask for diverse data and representation in those in that evidence as well. But some of the distribution channels for us has changed, like where typical sort of like distribution channels, whether it's employee benefits or whether it's, health insurers, it's now opened up to income protection. It's now opened up to pension providers. So, if you look at the gender gap when it comes to pension, there's a 40% change. So what that means is, there are a typical man will retire with, say, for example, 100K, and a woman who has gone through, motherhood or the menopause will effectively retire with 60K, and therefore will need to work extra number of years to get to close the gender pension gap. So we're seeing pension providers now looking at reimbursing this as well. So the distribution channels have really evolved. So as healthcare players, you have to be creative in terms of who your partners are, and it doesn't have to be the typical route anymore.
Thank you very much for the panel discussion. Thank you, Eva, for moderation. And allow me just to say that that's the kind of gender imbalance that I wish to have more of in panel discussions at conferences. Thank you so very much. Again.